Good morning. I'm Nova Blake, and this is your complete political briefing for Monday, April 20, 2026. Tonight, the United States Navy seizes an Iranian cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman as peace talks hang on the brink of collapse. Let's get into it. Starting with the top stories from across the American political landscape. A nation is mourning tonight after the deadliest mass shooting in the United States since January 2024. 8 children, ranging in age from 18 months to 14 years old, were shot and killed early Sunday morning in Shreveport, Louisiana, in what police describe as a domestic violence incident. The suspected gunman, identified as 31-year-old Shamar Elkins, was the father of 7 of the 8 children he killed. He was shot dead by police following a carjacking and a high-speed chase into neighboring Bossier Parish. This tragedy has shattered an entire community, and House Speaker Mike Johnson, whose congressional district includes Shreveport, called it a heartbreaking tragedy, while Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry said he and his wife are praying for all those affected. A constitutional showdown is now building in the United States Senate over the War Powers Resolution of 1973. The Republican-led Senate rejected, by a vote of 47 to 52, the 4th Democratic effort this year to halt President Trump's military campaign in Iran, a campaign that began on February 28th with joint American-Israeli strikes against Iranian targets. The 60-day threshold under the War Powers Resolution falls on April 29th, and senators on both sides of the aisle are watching that deadline with extraordinary attention, because what happens in the next 10 days could fundamentally reshape the president's authority to wage war. 2 key Republican senators are now publicly signaling they will not support the Iran war beyond that 60-day deadline without formal congressional authorization. Senators Susan Collins of Maine and Tom Tillis of North Carolina, both of whom had previously voted to protect the president's war authority, made clear this week that their support has hard limits. Senator Collins stated that if the conflict reaches 60 days, she would very likely vote against authorizing further hostilities, while Senator Tillis called it difficult to imagine extending his support without a detailed briefing on strategic objectives and an exit plan. Their positions matter enormously. With the current Senate margin already razor-thin, even 2 Republican defections could put the president's wartime authority in genuine legal jeopardy. On the diplomatic front, the United States and Iran are headed back to the negotiating table, this time in Islamabad, Pakistan, with Vice President J.D. Vance leading the American delegation. The talks follow a marathon 21-hour session last weekend that ended without a deal, with both sides pointing fingers over the primary sticking point, Iran's nuclear program. President Trump had claimed that Tehran agreed to surrender its stockpile of highly enriched uranium to the United States, a claim a senior Iranian official flatly rejected. Iran holds approximately 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. The ceasefire between the 2 countries expires Wednesday, making this week's talks among the most consequential diplomatic meetings in years. The United States Navy fired on and seized an Iranian-flagged cargo vessel in the Gulf of Oman on Sunday, after the ship attempted to bypass the American naval blockade of the region. President Trump confirmed the seizure, which comes just hours before the next scheduled round of American-Iranian peace talks in Pakistan. Iran's military has warned it will respond to the seizure, and state media suggested the talks themselves may not go forward, dramatically raising the stakes for the fragile ceasefire set to expire on Wednesday. The Department of Justice is escalating its investigation into former Central Intelligence Agency Director John Brennan, tapping former Trump attorney Joseph DeGenova to take a leading role in the Southern District of Florida probe. DeGenova, a longtime critic of Brennan and a former United States attorney in Washington, will join the investigation as lead counsel, following the recent departure of the career prosecutor who had previously overseen the case. Brennan has repeatedly condemned the investigation as politically motivated, and his attorney has stated there is no legal basis for the inquiry. The appointment nonetheless marks a significant escalation of a probe that critics say is being driven by the White House's desire to pursue political opponents. The main Democratic Senate primary race is heating up into one of the most closely watched contests of the 2026 midterm cycle. Progressive combat veteran Graham Plattner is challenging two-term Governor Janet Mills, the candidate backed by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, in what Democrats see as a must-win Senate seat currently held by Republican Susan Collins. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts traveled to Maine this week to rally for Plattner, signaling the progressive wing's determination to reshape the party's leadership trajectory heading into November. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, now 100 days into his tenure, is making waves nationally as he navigates a $5.4 billion budget shortfall, advances plans for city-run grocery stores, and pushes a signature pied-à-terre tax on luxury second homes that he says would raise $500 million annually. On Sunday, Mamdani appeared on national television to discuss his broader political agenda, pointedly sidestepping questions about whether Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer should step aside, while making clear he sees the Democratic Party as needing a fundamental shift in vision, not just personnel. His rise continues to define the fault lines within the Democratic Party ahead of the midterms. The Virginia redistricting battle is headed for a major moment at the ballot box. Voters in a special election on April 21st will decide whether the state constitution should be amended to allow the Democrat-controlled General Assembly to temporarily redraw congressional maps before the 2030 census. Republicans have fought the referendum in court at multiple levels, arguing the process was unconstitutional from the start. A federal judge initially sided with them before the Virginia Supreme Court allowed the ballot measure to proceed. The outcome is expected to directly affect the balance of power in the United States House of Representatives in November. Now turning to Washington and the latest actions from the current administration. Here are 10 significant developments from the administration this week. President Trump signed a new executive order on April 18th, directing the Food and Drug Administration and the Drug Enforcement Administration to fast-track access to psychedelic drugs, including ibogaine compounds and other substances with breakthrough therapy designations, as potential treatments for serious mental illness. The order instructs the Food and Drug Administration Commissioner to issue national priority vouchers for qualifying psychedelic therapies, ensuring that regulatory red tape does not delay their review. The administration described the action as a landmark commitment to Americans suffering from treatment-resistant and complex mental health conditions. The 60-day war powers clock is now the single most urgent constitutional pressure point facing the Trump administration. The White House has not publicly acknowledged the April 29th deadline imposed by the War Powers Resolution of 1973, which requires the president to either secure a formal authorization for use of military force from Congress or begin withdrawing American forces from the Iran conflict. With Senate Republican dissenters like Collins, Tillis, and Murkowski, each staking out conditions for their continued support, the administration faces an increasingly narrow window to either resolve the conflict diplomatically or bring Congress into the authorization process. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is facing growing scrutiny over the pace and direction of the Department of Justice under his leadership. Blanche tapped former Trump attorney Joseph DiGenova to spearhead the John Brennan investigation this weekend, a move that comes after the previous lead prosecutor was quietly removed from the case and amid reports of internal frustration at the Justice Department over how slowly the probe has moved. The development is the latest in a series of personnel shifts at the department, since Pam Bondi was ousted earlier this year over the president's dissatisfaction with her handling of politically sensitive investigations. The American naval blockade in the Gulf of Oman and the broader Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most consequential pressure points in global energy markets. The United States Navy's seizure of an Iranian-flagged vessel on Sunday represents the latest enforcement action in a blockade that has been choking global energy supply for weeks, with the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil flows, remaining partially closed. The standoff is directly driving energy price concerns across allied nations, and the ceasefire framework between the United States and Iran is set to expire Wednesday, April 22nd. Vice President J.D. Vance is personally leading the American delegation to a new round of peace negotiations with Iran in Islamabad, Pakistan, beginning this week. The talks center on two primary flashpoints: the disposition of Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium and the terms under which the Strait of Hormuz might be reopened to international shipping. Iran has demanded extensive sanctions relief and the unfreezing of more than $20 billion in assets. The administration has pushed for Iran to surrender its uranium stockpile entirely, a demand Tehran has publicly called a non-starter. The administration is continuing to enforce its immigration priorities at record levels, with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, now detaining more individuals than at any point in the agency's history since its founding in 2003. 29 people have died in ICE custody since October, already surpassing the previous annual record of 28, set in 2004. The toll has drawn congressional scrutiny, and acting ICE Director Todd Lyons, who testified before a Senate hearing this week, submitted his resignation the same day he testified, adding to a string of recent leadership departures at the Department of Homeland Security. The administration's Securing and Accelerating Federal Elections, or SAVE, Act, which would require proof of citizenship to register to vote, passed the House in February and is now stalled in the Senate behind a Democratic filibuster. President Trump has publicly urged Republican Senate leaders to change chamber rules to allow the bill to pass with a simple 50-vote majority, bypassing the 60-vote threshold needed to overcome the filibuster. Senate Republican leadership has indicated the votes are not currently there to eliminate the filibuster for this measure, leaving one of the administration's key election integrity priorities in legislative limbo. The administration's executive order establishing a new task force to eliminate fraud in federal benefit programs, signed last month, is now moving into its operational phase, with Vice President J.D. Vance serving as the task force's chair. The order directs the task force to coordinate a comprehensive national strategy targeting fraud, waste, and abuse across housing, food, medical, and cash assistance programs administered jointly with state and local partners. The Federal Trade Commission chairman is serving as vice chair of the new task force, which has the authority to coordinate across all relevant cabinet agencies. The administration secured a pharmaceutical import executive order earlier this month, signed April 2nd, directing adjustments to the importation of pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical ingredients into the United States. The order reflects the administration's broader effort to reduce American dependence on foreign manufactured drugs, particularly from China and India, by restructuring the supply chains for critical medications. Industry analysts and healthcare policy experts are closely watching how the order's implementation will affect domestic drug pricing and availability in the months ahead. The administration continues to push forward on its ensuring citizenship verification and integrity in Federal Elections Executive Order, signed March 31st, which directs federal agencies to implement stricter verification protocols across voter registration systems they interact with or administer. The order works in parallel with the stalled SAVE Act in Congress, representing the White House's effort to advance election integrity priorities through executive action when legislative pathways face gridlock. Civil liberties organizations have already signaled legal challenges to the measure, and its constitutional durability remains an open question in multiple federal circuits. That's your full briefing for Monday, April 20, 2026. I'm Nova Blake. Stay informed, stay ahead. We'll see you next time.